Here with political consultant and good friend Paul Robbins. Paul, we look at the numbers. We've got a couple of races that have already been won. John View reelected in Chicopee and Mike McCabe in Westfield right now. So those races, the polls closed both of those cities at 7 o'clock tonight. So no big surprises.
Yeah, no big surprise. I think it's kind of cool, though, that a person of color ran in Chicopee. That's groundbreaking anyhow. Hispanic female running for mayor.
And she really energized that
She
whole
really
race.
did. She got him on his toes.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had to really take it seriously. Let's face it, just, a couple of years ago, Shirley Arriaga replaced Joe Wagner. No one thought that would happen. So the valley's kind of shifting, but I think View took it seriously, and I would keep an eye on her for the future.
She's not going away.
She's not going away. Very articulate. I saw her on your show. She was able to really articulate issues. At the end of the day, incumbency is hard to overcome unless there's some overriding local issue that just blew up in somebody's face. So, so that doesn't surprise me, but keep an eye on her going forward.
Mike McCabe, a big winner in Westfield, 76 to 24% over Kristen Mello. I don't have the numbers yet on her running for city council for re-election there. Interesting race, but it was, I remember she told me here that the reason she got into the race was to get her issues out in the forefront more than anything else. And her big concern was about the contamination of the wells in Westfield.
Yeah, so I think the lesson there is when you run for a local office, to be, I'm not going to say this is necessarily true, but probably a one-issue candidate, unless everyone's hair is on fire about that one issue.
One issue in one race.
Yeah, and
that's the other part.
I mean, exactly, and also on the ballot for her seat. So it's like, well, let's keep her there, but do we have to? So yeah, I mean, be careful when you're running on just one particular issue, unless of course it's like something like crime, right, or corruption or something. So.
The big issue in Springfield, we just mentioned quickly that Chris Johnson is leading Cece Calabrese in Agawam with about a third of the vote counted. But in Springfield, a third of the vote counted. Dom Sarno has a very slim lead, about, what are we looking at here? A little over 100 votes.
Wow. Wow. So what I'm going to say is, without looking at it, if you have a third of the city in, that means it's probably not just embedded in a few wards. Right? So it's not wards 4 or 5 where a larger population of people of color, although the population of people of color who are voters in Springfield is dramatically changing. So to have been ahead and winning the primary by north of 20 points, and we got a third of the city in, there's a 100-vote difference, something's going on there right now. So it'd be interesting to see when we get over the tipping point of 50% of the vote in. That's really surprising to me.
Where that's going to stand. And the other thing, of course, last Thursday, the issue that came up with the accusations that the Hearst campaign, not Justin himself, were paying for votes. Yeah,
so you got to be careful with stuff. I always say that. It's funny. I used to have this thing with candidates I would work with. When you get to Thursday, whatever's going to happen, if it's tilting in one way or another, people want change, it solidifies around Thursday. Because you get into the last weekend, there's not a lot you can do. You got Monday, which is almost like Tuesday, the election. So when something happens in that, and on the surface, it looks bad, right? That if he had any awareness of it. But he probably had his finest moment when he did that press conference and talked about what he saw for the city, the things that were, you know, the incumbent had been there too long and that kind of stuff.
He diverted the attention away from
really
the problem.
And so you could see some, I said at the time, this isn't necessarily a slam dunk against Hearst, because you kind of have the city hall machine, you know, and you have a mayor that's been there a long time, who was well liked, by the way.
Yeah.
Some people could want change and say, you know what, that doesn't bother me. These other things I see in the city do bother me. So sometimes that stuff can boomerang, and it's always, you got to be very careful because, you know, they use the cameras. Obviously, Sarno was aware of it. He got his city solicitor to weigh in. You got to be really careful about that stuff. Yeah. And so it's possible that thing could have just kind of, you know, exploded out there, and people said, well, all right, well, okay, if that's fraud, maybe there's, you know, maybe it's time for a change, you know.
We should also mention, too, as we wrap up, that it looks like in East Long Meadow, they have agreed, the voters have agreed to fund 2 new schools, Proposition 2.5.
Yeah, that's a
one brand new school. There were 2 questions.
Yeah, one was about the pool. Yeah, did both the pool pass as well?
I believe it did, yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So that's a hard bar cross, Proposition 2.5 overrides. What
Yeah.
that tells me, and it's probably no surprise to people listening and watching, that it's becoming more and more of a bedroom community, more families. They're motivated to get out and vote. Typically, younger people who have kids in the school system want better facilities. Older people say, "Hey, I'm paying for your kid." And in Springfield, for instance, the school budget dwarfs the regular city budget.
Sure.
So people say, "No mas." Yes, it's reimbursed by the state, but that reimbursement is coming down. So I give them credit. I give the folks who are in favor of that credit, because that is not an easy thing to do to pass an override.
The other thing with that, too, is I know when we had both candidates in from Agawam, they're looking at the possibility of a brand new high school over there. And this could be a good indicator in East Long Meadow what could happen in Agawam if a vote came up.
Yeah, I think you'd say for a long time, people have been moving out of Springfield, moving to places across the river like Agawam. So, yeah, that maybe bodes well for them.
All right. Paul, thank you. We're going to be back in about 45 minutes, so we should have actually pretty much everything in by then. Not like the old days where we used to wait all night long for our folks in Westfield, and they're one of the first ones in. The good old days. It was all done by paper. We'll be back, and of course, you can always go online to westernmassnews.com and on our Western Mass News app for the latest results. I'm Dave Madsen for Paul Robbins. We'll see you in a little bit.